I'm bullish on the economy. I think inflation is never going to come back to where it was before. Regulation can be incredibly destructive, as you're well aware, but it can also really create opportunity.
There's opportunity, and when you look at things with that angle, that's the way to do it.
I think that there's a lot of really smart people and a lot of opportunity in the multifamily space. Things are going to shake out. Some people are going to take a hit and some people will keep on going, and opportunities will be created in certain markets.
Every business, guys, is nothing but people and systems, putting the right butts in the right seats and coaching them. My most successful coaching students aren't the smartest. They're just the ones that take the most action. Welcome back to Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing. I'm Rod Khleif, and I am thrilled that you're here. And you are going to love this fascinating conversation I'm going to have with Jonah Bamberger. And Jonah's a freaking rock star in the space, got about $1 billion in assets under management. Has probably forgotten more about it than many people know. And we've already had a wonderful pre-frame conversation to this interview, so I'm very excited to get into it. Welcome, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's fun to talk shop, and we've already had some stimulating conversation, which I'm sure we'll put some clips out on. But why don't you give us a little background on you? It's Aulder Capital, and you're the founder and CEO or executive chairman. So maybe tell us a little bit about you, your history, and
sure.
Yeah, bring us up. Yeah.
So I grew up in Israel, and then we moved to the DC area. So kind of my foundational years were in the DC area, in Northern Virginia and Rockville, Maryland. Went to college at Cornell, and then moved back to Israel, got my master's, and kind of worked in the infrastructure space for the first couple of years of my career, both in the consulting side and then at an energy company, Siemens, the big German conglomerate, and then in a fund. And from that point, I kind of, started
when you said
out as
infrastructure, what specifically did you mean by that?
Roads, energy.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, okay.
Solar energy,
actual public
but
infrastructure.
Really,
okay,
yeah.
All right, got it.
And it's interesting how similar that is in some ways to real estate, because at the end of the day, you're not providing housing for people, you're providing energy for people, or so on and so forth. I mean, especially when it comes to solar, PV, solar panels and so on. It's not that different from self-storage or some of those kind of operationally light real estates. But I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wouldn't necessarily call it a drive. It's more like a sickness or a disease. And I think you could probably agree on that one. But it's, I wanted to do my own thing. And it kind of started out in Brooklyn, New York with a 6-unit multifamily that I did with a couple of friends. And that's where Aulder kind of started, as it was
This was
post-crash.
12 years ago?
Yeah, this is 2012.
Wow. Good timing, actually. They're still
it was amazing
from the crash.
I mean, yeah, anything you were doing is was doing great. And Brooklyn was going through a real renaissance, and it felt good. And we're value add players, so we'll what we like to do is pick up a slump, something that was really poorly managed, and really make it nice. It's we were working within some pretty strict regulations for rent stabilization that then dramatically changed in 2019. It's a whole different story.
For the better or worse?
Oh, for the worse.
Right.
It was incredibly destructive in terms of capital. It essentially meant that investors were, replacing the state in terms of, it was essentially nationalizing projects. Yeah. We were simply expected to be public housing, and it hasn't changed much for the better in New York since then. If you're talking about 2 years for eviction or whatever it is you want, 2 years being
to evict. Good
in a good situation. We've had ones that have taken longer.
You guys have heard me say avoid blue states. I mean, here's a prime example of that debacle, and they have to keep taxing. I mean, they're broke, and they have to keep taxing. You pay the highest taxes when you're based in New York, don't you? That or California?
New York's an interesting one because the fundamentals of real estate are so strong, and that's what we always liked about it. Is that you can, the supply is extremely limited. The demand is very strong because living in New York is very different than investing in New York. So you've got really strong drivers, but you've got an incredibly unfriendly environment. Right. We always consider myself a housing provider, not a landlord. In New York, if you watch enough TV, landlords are always the bad guys. But at the end of the day, we're coming in, we're improving buildings, but we're also improving entire neighborhoods at the end of the day.
Sure.
And I think that's that's something
I know
that
you've
has
got
to
assets.
be,
You've got assets in
encompassed.
New York. You've got assets in Philly, which like Jersey, or actually in Philadelphia, or
So we always avoided Philadelphia. We had about 1,000 units in suburban Philadelphia.
Gotcha.
At that point, we were kind of a bit more shy on the deep blue cities, just in terms of regulatory exposure.
Right.
Even though Philadelphia is not so bad.
no?
But in the suburbs, it felt a lot better. You had fairly flat growth in terms of population, but very high GDP growth, which always felt good for us in terms of just basic fundamentals. Most of that portfolio got sold in 2022. We did really well off of it.
Nice.
In Maryland, we've got about 1,000 units, a bit more. Multifamily, of course, and then we kept on going down south. We went today we have in Myrtle Beach. Previously, we also went out to the Midwest a bit, to Louisville, Kentucky.
All right.
Again, a lot of that same kind of core fundamentals, where we felt there was good growth. Of course, it didn't perform, I think, as well as the Carolinas or Texas.
Right.
But we did well off of it, and I think we were comfortable with what we did.
Nice. Nice. So I know you're not just in multifamily, you're also in some other asset classes. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, we chase yield, and I'd love to have part of that conversation with you as well. I know that you work in different states and different sectors as well. We kind of fell in love to some extent with the hospitality sector. We won a couple of concessions from New York City Parks and one from the National Park Service to kind of create like a Miami-style beach club in New York City, which is just this amazing passion project. It's also been very difficult.
So you built a restaurant concession inside of a park in New York, or
we have two of them. We have one in it's called McCarran Park House. It's in McCarran Park.
Okay.
And that's a 20-year concession. It's a great little spot.
Wow.
Really fun to run. And it does well. But that's a bit different than traditional multi, of course. And we also have the concession for the Rockaways Boardwalk, which is also really cool. Just a really cool project. Very weather dependent. So in terms of that, it's
that's no fun. The weather thing, when you're at the mercy of the weather. I used to, one of my 29 businesses I've started was a cold air balloon business where you put balloons on top of roofs, and boy, you ended up hating the wind because you couldn't make any money. But yeah, weather dependent's no fun.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because now one of our pain points in Myrtle Beach, and we have a couple of assets, smaller ones in Florida, but the insurance that comes with anything that's weather dependent.
Yeah, we were talking about that before you got here. I told you got to go look at my dock. It looks like something out of a Dr. Seuss book from Hurricane Milton, and Helene threw my boat 3 doors down the road. Jet skis ended up in the backyard, but I settled for almost $1 million on Hurricane Ian here, and then that was, and now this happened. So insurance is going to continue to be a real problem.
Right. Well, on the multifamily side, it's it really affects your bottom line, right? Every dollar goes to the insurance company.
Just had an update call with limited partners on an asset in San Antonio. We showed them our insurance has literally doubled on that asset.
Has it really?
Oh yeah. So we had to suspend distributions for a few months just to rebuild reserves, just to play it safe. Had to explain why. That's the main reason why.
One of the big questions that I query is, as a lot of these places, the values went up so high. So in theory, cash flow, okay. But then you get the tax assessment. But now the insurance has gone up. So what's going to happen with the taxes? I don't see them coming back down. So it's just destruction of capital.
Of course, you fight the taxes every year. But no, both of them. Luckily, that didn't hit us. And when I was just thinking back through our PowerPoint last night, the taxes weren't as big a deal. But also, contract labor went way up.
It sure did.
We're paying a lot more there. We've had to, and just this on-site labor went way up. To get decent people, you have to pay a lot more because they're paying a lot more at the grocery store. So,
right.
But, and then I want to talk about the election and the economy and inflation and some of that stuff. But let's talk about chasing yield first. Okay, because you brought that up a couple of times. And so you say you chase yield. So, the concession thing, was that more passion than yield chasing? I'm assuming it was, but maybe not.
because of what happened to us in 2020, which is kind of right when COVID hit, right? We saw that there was, we hit the brakes on multifamily. And during 2020, we didn't get a single deal done. So we said, okay, well, what else can we do?
I see.
And we saw real opportunity where there's just less competition. So you've got this incredible foot traffic. You're working with the city, which is both a pleasure and a nightmare at the same time.
So it was a yield play. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And, because you got really good people who really want to get stuff done, but you're also working within this very challenging bureaucracy, type environment. Yeah. So it's got pluses and minuses, just like everything else you do. And I think it's been exciting. We have a good partner who's kind of doing the operations for us. I don't want to operate
right. No, well, that's
the
smart.
sale
that's
of beer,
smart. That's smart. Yeah.
or cleaning hotel rooms or so on.
Right. You buy some hotels as well?
We also used to have a short-term rental operator, which that was too challenging with business. We ended up shutting it down.
It's hurting right now, actually. That business is hurting.
Yeah, you win some and you lose some, and it's that one's particularly painful because we worked so hard at it. It was it was constantly changing. COVID actually did great for it because so many people were avoiding hotels.
Right.
And really kind of went great, and then it kind of ramped back down, and the regulations all over, it kind of came out of the multifamily space saying, well, how can we get a best utilization out of the space?
Sure.
How can we take some of our vacant units and kind of do something a bit more
did you do it in some of your complexes as well?
Some of the ones that were relevant, yeah. Not all of our units are relevant.
Some of them don't fit, right.
Yeah,
got it. Okay.
But, so maybe 20% of, in Myrtle Beach, for example, some of them
that'd be a good spot. Yeah, okay.
Well, you would think so, but it's very seasonal, and it's...
true.
True. But for multifamily, it's been a very strong market.
It has. So. Yeah, I've got students that are doing midterm rentals, which are going really well. Like nurses, things like that, traveling nurses, and so on. And they've been very successful with that. But my brother's got some cabins up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and he sold 2 of them already. It's just
too much work.
No, they're just not. They're not occupied like they used to be. It's really come down. So right. I don't know what's causing that, if it's an economic thing or what it is, but they've definitely had a pullback. So besides the hospitality and hotels and or that concessions, is there any other area that you chased yield in?
Yeah, we actually a couple of years ago we hopped across the pond and did we do residential development, condo development in Portugal. And that's been a really interesting one.
Wow.
It's the first time that we left the U.S. And
did you find a local partner there as well?
We did. We do have a local partner, and he's fantastic. And it's the entire market in Portugal is so based on Americans looking for
expats.
Yeah, well, it's specifically for their pension, for their retirement.
Oh,
Florida's not as cheap as it used to be.
Oh, you mean utilizing their pension to go move there and live there?
Yeah,
got it. So expatriates. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the it's a 5-hour flight. You get European level healthcare.
It's 5 hours from the East Coast?
From New York, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know it was that close.
Yeah.
I guess it is because it's kind of leaning off to the left there on the map. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Great weather, old school weather. Europe, and you've got really strong drivers. And at some point, I assume that the locals might get annoyed, but but for now, they're appreciative and they're supportive, and they struggle to create more housing, and this really drives their economy. And
have you broken ground? Are you done with it?
Yeah, we're in construction.
We're in construction right now. How many units?
Altogether, we've got about 400 units under construction.
No kidding. And this is multifamily?
So condos? It's mostly condo.
Condos.
And development.
Okay, so you're going to be selling them.
Yeah. Some of them, we explored the build to rent space, but the yield was much lower. In terms of chasing yield, of course, and the regulations in Europe in general, Portugal specifically as well.
For renters?
Yeah.
Same. Yeah.
Well, exactly what you imagine them to be.
It's got a socialist component to it as well there, I suppose. Yeah.
It does. But on the flip side, it's been very friendly in terms of the development process.
What's the main city, just from my own edification, that you fly into for Portugal?
There's really 2 big cities. There's Lisbon is the capital. It's about 2.5 million people, 3 million. Okay. And we work in Porto, which is the second city.
Okay.
And it's lovely, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's on the bucket list. I've been to Barcelona a few times, but I have not been to Portugal, so definitely going to have to go check that out.
Lovely people, delicious food, wonderful weather. It's just
can't complain about any of that.
None of it. So but our bread and butter is multifamily.
Yeah.
East Coast,
Love it.
up and down.
Love it.
And I think that that's, at the end of the day, it's there's a cycle, and we're at a certain point in the cycle that's challenging.
Very challenging right now. It used to be survive till 25. I don't know what it's going to be now, but
well, they never promised a switch month, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. There's that piece as well. Well, let's shift gears and let's talk about a taboo subject, which is the election. I'm as red can be, but be interested to know what your thoughts are as far as, depending upon if Harris wins versus Trump wins, if you have any thoughts about the impact of either scenario. Because, some of the stuff Harris is throwing out there is kind of sobering to me. Taxing unrealized gains and, the $25,000 credit for new home buyers. And nobody talks about who pays for it,
Have you come across national rent stabilization?
No.
Where they limit that's been talked about a bit.
Well, they're talking about if you own more than 50 homes, you're not gonna have the tax benefits any longer. So.
Right, that one I know. Right. The one that really, and we've seen it come across in a couple of places, is a limitation on how much you can raise rents on existing tenants. Now, how they would do that on a national level, I assume is with HUD dollars, essentially federal funding.
Yeah,
that's kind of, or maybe some kind of benefit in terms of mortgage programs or so on.
That's another blue initiative.
It is, and it's
wow.
What we find about regulations is that they can be supportive or destructive because of just because of market failure in different markets. And in New York, there's such a strong the supply and demand is so out of whack, and the cost of building and the bureaucracy and everything is just so challenging, and yet it's such an interesting city to work in. Regulation can be incredibly destructive, as you're well aware.
Sure.
But it can also really create opportunity. And I think that that's where,
That's a great way to look at it. It's a great way to look at it. Seriously. I want to commend you for that comment because, with anything, there's opportunity. And when you look at things with that angle, that's the way to do it.
So one of the things that we've tried to do is, anything that the regulation is too unpredictable, then that's what we've really been trying to avoid.
Right.
A city that really doesn't want you to succeed is probably a tough city to work in. And I think that that's where New York, we've got a strong mayor with Eric Adams, who is promoting the real estate industry, but, whoever's next in line, he's under indictment and so on.
We know what's going on there, right?
Right.
Yeah.
May not share the same view. The previous administration was very anti, and it destroyed an amount of capital that can only be...
Really? Big amount, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we try to avoid those things, and that's where the Southeast is really just a friendlier place to do business. I think it's not.
I like it. Like I told you when we started recording, you asked me how long I've lived here. I said I could be a poster child for the Florida Chamber. You can't keep people out. Now, yeah, we're going to have to deal with this insurance debacle because it's not going down. But man, I'd buy everything I could get my hands on down here if it penciled, because ultimately, rents are going to keep going. I think at some point this could end up looking like California from a population standpoint.
Well, Rod, how do you feel about pricing? Because it really went through, and I'm not talking about rent. I mean, also, valuations and everything around it. I mean, it really popped in the last 5 years. Do you think it's just a question of growth and kind of supply and demand?
Well, I mean, we saw 30+% rent growth in 1 year in the Tampa MSA. Okay. By the way, MSA is Metropolitan Statistical Area, like a big geographic area. So that's what MSA means, guys. But
that's like 2 hours up and down, right?
Yeah. Well, pretty much. I think here in Sarasota we're even in the Tampa MSA. But bottom line is 32% rent
That's
growth
incredible.
in 1 freaking year. I mean, that's crazy. And in my view, obviously unsustainable and whatnot. So, as we all know, the values of this real estate is based on a multiple of the net income, and obviously we saw huge increases there. So, I want to get your opinion. Okay, I have my opinions. Right. I think the proverbial, what's going to hit the fan here, regardless of the election results. But I'd love to get your opinion as to what you think is going to happen valuation-wise, and some of these, and maybe in your market that you're specifically in. If you think it's going to just stabilize and can keep going up, if you think inflation is going to keep driving the rents up, I actually think that.
Yeah.
Because inflation is bad, but it does also affect rents. So.
Right. Well, I've seen some of your, I've heard you talk, and I agree completely in terms of the national housing shortage. I think in specific markets at specific times, it works the opposite. Myrtle Beach right now is overbuilt. I think that supply will get
So we're seeing a lot of new absorption in some of these other markets that we're in as well. In fact, that was part of the conversation on our San Antonio call last night. Is we've seen a lot, but it's died starting next year. So it'll stabilize. It'll come back fairly quickly. But it's been crazy the last couple of years in the Texas market, and I guess in Myrtle Beach as well, and some of these other.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story, and I think that and then we'll come back to the politics around it. But in COVID in New York, which has a lot of universities and a lot of students, and is just because of its size, it's such an interesting story and case study. The city itself is, let's call it 10 million people, right? So Brooklyn, if it was its own city, which it's close to 3 million, would be the fourth largest city.
Wow. And
New York would still be the largest. Okay. So you had 600,000 students leave or move back in with their parents. That's bigger than Boston, essentially, right? So when you talk about supply and demand and kind of how that drives and what the fundamentals behind that are, you look at a place like Florida that looks like you can just keep on building forever. But at the end of the day, you've got real cities like Miami, which has had incredible growth, Tampa, which is really filled in. And then the question is, at what point is it worthwhile to start going up? Sarasota
or
pricing,
spreading east from Tampa to connecting Orlando and Tampa, that's becoming more and more of a reality. Come south to Sarasota, all of that.
And then that's the question, right? Is how does the supply versus demand? What's the ability to build, and how do you do it cheaply enough? You've got places kind of in the Midwest where there's been fairly stagnant growth, in terms of population, but there's still a lot of people. And some of the product is old. I mean, we used to buy 1970s product.
Right.
That's old.
Oh, that's
55.
Old now. Yeah.
No offense to anybody on this call.
I'm in the mid-'80s minimum at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I prefer 90s. But,
right. And that stuff, you can look at it and it looks cheap, but at the end of the day, the amount of work that has to go into it, it's, you have to be very, very careful. And I think we've made, we've gotten lucky on some deals in terms of that. And sometimes we've made some mistakes, in terms of just what the status and what the state of this property is, right? On
that note, because I love to ask this question, I've got a boot camp coming up. I should have, somewhere between 700 and 1,000 people in Orlando in a couple weeks. And I put panels on stage. They're all my students. And one of the questions I ask that I love to, because I get crazy answers, talk about what I call a seminar, which is a failure, a setback, a reckoning. And I'd love to ask you that question, because you're dealing in bigger numbers, and you've probably forgotten more of that stuff and we all have these war stories and things that have happened to us. I'd love it you share one of yours, and maybe the lesson in it, a real doozy. A mistake you made, because we all have made mistakes,
I mean, so there's so many I could choose from.
I know. That's always the answer when I ask the question to the panelists on stage too. Where do I start?
Where do I start exactly? Right. I think that one of the things that we, and it might sound like an obvious one, but people.
Yeah. Of course.
Right.
Making a bad selection with people.
Well, interestingly enough. Some of the people that we've had that were the best started off the worst, and I think
you
that
groomed them. Wow.
Well,
they were in the wrong seat.
I think that they were in the wrong seat, and I think that it was kind of the attention that they were given. So when they didn't have somebody really kind of, and this is where you, as a business owner, you kind of have to be a psychologist, right?
Sure.
Some people really need to have their hand held, and you really got to work with them and support them and take them through processes, and then they can be, an A player. And some people, you kind of have to leave them alone.
Let them just do their thing. Yeah.
That's right. And I think, today we've got a fairly stabilized team.
How big is your team? Just curious.
About 80 people.
80, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to digress,
sure.
but do you, I'm a big proponent for EOS from the book Traction, that operating system. Do you have any sort of a mechanism you use in your organization to help, keep your eye on the ball? If you're familiar with the EOS system, Entrepreneurs Operating System, it's a book called Traction, and basically what you do, I've used it in all my businesses now and really love it. And you do basically 90-day quarterly meetings, and you come up with your next 90-day goals, and they call them rocks, but they're goals.
Okay.
And instead of an organizational chart, you actually have an accountability chart, which is kind of fascinating, where you're just focused on what's accountable. But so I don't know if you've ever brought business consultants in to help with things that you've done.
We have. We also interestingly enough, we've got a friend of the firm who's an organizational behaviorist.
Well, there you go.
Professor Sam Backrack. And he's come in and done some seminars for us and given us some great advice just in terms of, some of his books are, called, the clunky organization, which unfortunately my organization has certainly at certain times fallen into that category where we just can't seem to push things forwards, or one which really focuses on kind of how to convince a team to perform. And I think as an entrepreneur and owner, this isn't, I'm not a general in an army. I can't tell everybody do this now and they'll all do it now. I know.
Oh, sure.
You got to get people's buy-in. They have to feel like they're part of a team. They have to, if you want good people, they have to have the right level of independence and empowerment, and and some people the click doesn't work, and then you have to know how to part ways as well.
Elegantly, every business, guys, is nothing but people and systems. You define the systems carefully, you categorize them, you E-myth them, for lack of a better term, and then by the way, the book E-myth by a guy named Michael Gerber talks about McDonaldizing a business, and that's what I meant by that. But you get the procedures and the checklists and the systems down. Then it's about putting the right butts in the right seats and coaching them. But like you said, as part of, like in this EOS process, we brought in everybody to play a role in that decision-making process and coming up with our code of values, coming up with our mission statement, coming up with some of these things, that they feel enrolled in and need to be a part of, and that really makes a difference. Would you agree?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's, there's different systems out there, and I think some of them you study in business school or you don't. I think the important part is picking one that suits your organization and really kind of committing to it. Sure. And it's a lot harder than it sounds. And it sounds, the one that you've pointed out, I haven't heard of it.
You might check it out. It's a guy named Gino Wickman.
Will.
Gino Wickman. The book is called Traction, and it's fascinating, actually, and it's been a game changer for us. But you're obviously super successful, so you're doing something right.
I actually saw your library downstairs, and it's below the studio, and it's amazing. It's just and it just shows like you can never stop learning. You got to keep on going. And
I didn't go to Cornell. I didn't go to college, but I'm pretty well read. So there you go. But and I show this picture of hundreds of lanyards on I have my arms out like this, and I've got hundreds of them around my neck and on my arms. I've learned from thought leaders, boot camps, masterminds, things of that nature, and that's basically my college. So
that's definitely a way to do
it. Whatever works. So back to the election. Do you think? I mean, are you bullish on the economy? Do you believe that we're going to just have a short stint here and then pull out?
First of all, I'm bullish on the economy. I think inflation is never going to come back to where it was before.
No way.
I think we've heard different people talk about, a world with two poles in terms of kind of a U.S., led one versus Chinese led, North and South, whatever you want to call it.
And they're making moves.
They are, and it's there's a lot of uncertainty on the geopolitical.
Really, what they're doing, yeah.
It is, but I think that there's something about the United States, and capitalism and the way to drive things forward, and I'm generally bullish. I think that there's a lot of really smart people and a lot of opportunity. In the multifamily space, I think we did talk about Survive to 25. I think there's going to be opportunities because I think things are going to shake out.
Yeah. They're shaking out. The water's coming out. We're going to see who's naked. Yeah.
Absolutely. And some people are going to take a hit, and some people will keep on going, and opportunities will be created in certain markets. And I think that's, interestingly enough, last time that happened was a mere 2 years ago in COVID. It was just some places got destroyed in some markets. If you were in office, you weren't going to do well, and if you're in logistics,
retail as well.
Absolutely.
Restaurants got killed, health clubs got killed.
And yet logistics and warehouses, you could never have imagined that it would hit those pricing points.
Right.
And
they're killing it. Yeah,
absolutely,
industrial's killing it right now.
Absolutely. Kind of makes me wish I was in it. But
same. I was thinking that this morning. I did a Facebook Live out in the back patio here, and I talked about that CRE Daily report that came out today from. Now I forgot the name of the economic outfit that put it out. But anyway, and it talked about how industrial's killing it. I'm like, thinking to myself, you dummy, you should have gotten some office warehouse or something. Got some flex space or something.
Exactly. But that's how it works, right? I mean, it goes up, it goes down, and you have to be agile and flexible. Yeah. I think in terms of the election itself, I think that the Trump administration will be more business friendly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in the past, what we've seen is that can happen is that it can create blowback on the local level. And I think in New York, 2019 rent regulations were partially, again, and I'm not
blaming... to fight the national...
Yeah, it was kind of counterproductive, and instead of, it's kind of whatever that guy's doing is going to do the opposite. So what we saw was local regulations that were a real challenge to deal with, whereas on the federal level, it was loose. It was very friendly.
Yeah. I mean, I think half the country is going to be pissed here in a few weeks, and so we'll see how it all shakes out.
That I know for a fact.
Yeah, half the country is going to be pissed because there's a lot of emotion around this, and so it'll be real interesting. I'm getting to a point where it's stressing me out, where I'm trying to stay off social media as much as I can, but it's a fail for the most part. But
Rod, what I can tell you is because I do live abroad, and I get to view it. Although I'm an American,
yeah. How do other countries view all this?
Right. So at the end of the day, and that's what's always interesting about the U.S. is it's kind of like an aircraft carrier, and it's going in a certain direction. So you might have a different pilot, but there's only so much you can change a direction so quickly. I mean, these things don't turn on a dime, and just the amount of energy behind the U.S. and is significant. So it might feel very personal and very close here, but from when you're sitting far away, regardless whether you're more Democrat or Republican, at the end of the day, I think that there's certain energy that's there's a certain energy that's behind it, and that's why I'm bullish at the end of the day. I think that, there's not going to be a revolution here.
I had lunch with my brother yesterday. He's like, what? Who cares? It's all going to shake out. And there's a limit to how much anybody's going to be able to get through. Pray that we've got stability in the House and the Senate, that they're not one way or the other, because that, and so hopefully... I think it'll all work out, but I do think there's going to be some reckoning, definitely in the multifamily space. I just in talking to this attorney last night, just some of the big operators, like I said before we started recording, that are in trouble right now, that just blew my mind who they were, that we're going to see some fallout and some opportunity. I mean,
we have good lender relationships with the lenders that we get along with the lenders that we don't get along with, obviously, just like everybody else. It's a lot tougher. And some of the stuff that we've been presented, or they're asking us to come in. Sometimes the lender is so far underwater that they're really, do they write off half their loan, or do they try to work out some kind of deal? But their all-in cost might be something that under the best cases circumstances, I can't pencil it to now. I don't know if they're including default interest rate. I don't know which kind of penalties or fees they're including in that.
Right.
But if the deal's worth 8 and they're like, our basis is 22, that's going to be hard to.
Well, it's impossible. And so and we're hearing that too. In fact, we just looked at a deal, wasn't quite that bad, but pretty bad. It was an $8 million debt, and there's just no way to make it work unless there's a concession from the lender. And right now the lenders are kicking the can down the curb, because if they don't, it hits their balance sheet, and as you know, and so they're forestalling in any way they can, hoping that, there's a light at the end of that tunnel with rates dropping and whatnot, I think is the mindset. So they're doing forbearances and mods and things like that. And they've been instructed by the Fed to do that as well if they have a credit-worthy borrower. But I think at some point the piper is going to get paid. So we'll see.
It's kind of like soft landing, the mythical soft landing in the economy, right? If you can kick it down the curb long enough, sometimes you can be avoided. And I think in retail space, which took what did they used to call it? Remind me, retail apocalypse?
Yeah. They did with the COVID thing, right?
And they managed to, I think retail today, it's a totally different price point, but I think it performs well.
Okay. Well, what about office?
Office,
I think office is doomed, and you really can't convert office to multifamily. Well, it's too expensive. Maybe self-storage, maybe IT centers, but nobody wants to work in an office anymore.
When we started out in kind of Brooklyn, in 2012. So it's just after the crash, the whole thing.
You know more than me then.
Williamsburg was known for lofts. You would take this old industrial space, you would throw a ridiculous apartment in. It was fun. It was cool. You had, 50-foot ceilings and, and a bathroom in the middle of your kitchen.
Okay. Now that could work. That could work.
But then at some point it gets redeveloped because that's not the
highest and best use.
It's not the highest and best use.
Yeah.
So, you can do it. Maybe you can do some kind of self-storage, or maybe you can carve out the middle part, but B, C-class office.
And what's the occupancy nationwide? I mean, it's like in the 60s, I think. I mean, it's bad.
Well, but it's actually, I think it's actually worse than that, because if you look at A-class office, which is what people want today, just like they want A-class everything else, it overperforms, right? So maybe that's okay if you've got 1 million square foot and you got Google in there.
Right.
You're in good shape, right? But if you've got B-class office with no parking in a C location.
And see, I think there could be a reckoning there. I think they're kicking the can down the curb there as well. So, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but, a third of that debt is held by small and regional banks. What's going to happen there? Is there going to, I mean, they're not too big to fail. And, we're already, our national debt's going up about $1 trillion every 100 days right now. At some point, I mean, you do the math. At some point, I don't know.
Well, but, I mean, I think the fun part of inflation is that, those numbers can be, I remember back in the day when I think it was a movie called Pulp Fiction where he's talking about a $5 shake.
Oh, yeah. $5 shake. That's right. I just watched that with Uma Thurman just very recently. Let me John Travolta. I want to know what a $5 shake tastes like. Yeah, that was
I'd like to see where you can buy a $5 shake today.
Right, you can't even find one today, right? Oh, that's funny. And with crisis comes opportunity, yes?
Absolutely. And I think that's the, patience. Certainly in today's day and age, TikTok generation, whatever you want to call it, it's, it's a lost art. But I think that in the next, I've seen different people talk about 12 months or so on. I think it's going to be a window that opens. It might shut relatively quickly just because there's so much capital on the sideline.
Exactly.
And for the people that are, aware and wary and looking for those opportunities and kind of out there ready to go, I think there'll be something really interesting going on.
Could be some good stuff.
And I don't think it's just a case of interest rates. I think interest rates are certainly impactful, but I think it's, a lot of it just has to do with trends at the end of the day. It's, suddenly something will loosen up or
Well, we have a housing shortage regardless.
That's right.
There's going to be a need regardless. We won't even talk about whatever it is, 10 to 20 million people that have come over the border. They all need to have a place to live, and so we were 5 million units short before all that happened. So, the fundamentals are there.
And I think that's the big thing is if people who are focused on fundamentals, on patience, on strong markets, on friendly regulations. And again, that's, I think one of the things kind of I look at is I don't mind regulations as long as they're clear and relatively friendly. You can limit, rent growth on existing tenants, and it's something that we can probably all live with to a certain extent.
As long as we penciled for it. Yeah,
right. As long as you don't change it, and as long as you make it, and as long as people pay.
Right.
If you tell people, listen, you don't have to pay rent, that's a really challenging environment for the multifamily
We went
space.
through that in COVID. We saw that and that whole rental assistance and everything that happened back then as well. But, I had someone sitting in where you're sitting, an economist tell me that 80% of the currency that's in circulation has been created in the last 4 years in this country.
Yeah, the question is how bad is that really? I mean, it's at the end of the day,
it's inflationary for sure.
It's inflationary.
Yeah. Are the inflation numbers that are thrown out there accurate? I mean, I'm blown away. I'm single now, and I go buy my own groceries, and I'm just blown away by what things cost, and I'm wondering how people can afford it, honestly. Right. And I'm seeing the impact, in some of our C assets that they're struggling. We're seeing our delinquencies go up, and
for sure. And I think Florida, and specifically this area, for example, is enjoyed or suffered that inflation more than most places.
Really.
It's not universal. I mean, it's Myrtle Beach. Part of the thing that really drove us there was that it became a tweener state because it wasn't as appealing as Florida. Florida used to be cheap. Florida's no longer cheap. I mean, Miami's
Oh, and Miami's crazy.
I mean, it's
I was
reaching
going to
New
get
York
a second.
levels.
I was, I make fun. I'm single now, and I make fun because, I'm an hour south of Tampa, and old people live in Tampa, and their parents live here in Sarasota, right?
Right.
And so I make that joke. and so, last time I was single, I had a second place in Miami, and I went and looked at the building I was in before. It was $5,000 a month 15 years ago. It's 15 to 20 grand a month now. So it's like F you money. Do I really want to do that to be back in Miami? I'm still thinking about it, but it's like, good Lord.
But that's exactly the point. But there's a reason, because Miami,
it's desirable. I mean, the traffic.
Desirable.
Don't get me started on the freaking traffic, though. Good Lord, especially in Brickell, it's crazy. But I love the energy of it, and
Exactly.
I have a beautiful Zen. I mean, you saw my place here. It's spectacularly peaceful and Zen and beautiful, but it's slow. So
right. New York, the city that never sleeps.
Right.
It did go to sleep for about 3 years there.
Did it?
It certainly did, and now it's kind of back, and it feels good, and that's
Nice.
When you talk about fundamentals and demand. I mean, if you're young and you want to be somewhere that's
exciting.
kicking.
New York,
Miami.
Yeah,
I mean,
those are the two. Yeah, in this country, those are the two.
Certainly on this coast, I think that's
and then LA on the other side, right? So I have a lot of listeners that have that want to be where you're at, want to be where I'm at. They want to own assets. They want to get out there and make things happen, but they haven't taken action yet for whatever reason. What suggestions might you have for someone that's listening or watching that knows they want to do something for themselves and their family, create, do a side hustle, and they like the idea of multifamily or real estate in general? Any words of wisdom for them?
Real estate is always a little bit trickier than it seems. Learning, reading, listening to podcasts, whatever it is, you can never gain enough information. And I don't think you need to necessarily have a PhD in real estate to play in this game or to work. I think you need patience. I think you need to be open-minded. I think you need to be aggressive when it's time to be aggressive. There's risk involved, and it can't be avoided. So don't take it too personally when it happens. I think I saw a show where somebody was talking about hard money loans. I'm not for or against those types of tools. You just have to be aware of, the risks that comes with it, and then go with something that will make your life better. If you're not going to sleep at night, don't do it.
Right.
And if this is something you're comfortable with, then, then that's the way to go. So for example, if you struggle working with tenants and you don't like people or dealing with them and their challenges, go with self-storage.
Yeah.
Or go with logistics. And if you like people and you want to make their lives better, since I'm not going to recommend being a slumlord,
right,
then I think multifamily is it's a fundamentally strong place to start. I think people always need a place to live, and if you give them a good product, I think they'll be grateful.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to live your life and to create wealth and value.
No, that's well said. And I will tell you this. In my world, you can outsource the property management, and so you're not dealing with the toilets and tenants. Now you're still asset managing, of course. You've got to manage the asset, but the bottom line is decide how you're going to pull yourself out. Decide how you're going to create that life that you want, and I think there's going to be incredible opportunity buying businesses. Frankly, there's 80 million baby boomers. A lot of them have businesses. They're going to want to ultimately sell.
True.
I think it's going to be incredible opportunity to buy businesses, as well as other real estate asset classes in general. But
well, one of the things that I've always found fascinating in terms of the psychology, it doesn't matter if it's a business or if it's real estate, a building, right, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. If you want to buy that, by and large, you have to be willing to pay more than the next person. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, right, they're going to sell it to the next person. Right. So it's true that you can get a better deal by certain tricks of the trade or being more aggressive, cash buying, so on and so forth. But the psychology behind getting to a place where you're willing to buy and pay more than the next because you see more potential value, that's always been an interesting one for me as well. And it goes also when you're selling is, you always want to get the best price. So is this the best offer you're going to get? Are you ready to sign on it? And I think that there's a certain level of confidence that has to come with it. Knowledge is probably the key to that one. And that's maybe the most challenging one, is saying, okay, I'm willing to pay this price, and then getting used to the fact that somebody's going to come to you and say, oh man, you overpaid for that.
Right. Well, and like you said, that only comes from knowledge. And you know, we kiss a lot of frogs to find the deals we want, right?
Yeah, we do.
I mean, and so,
yeah, we do.
You know, but we stick to our guns, and that serves us. And so, you know, but that is a factor, and that's why, you know, the bottom line is, what, you know, if you're listening, whatever it is, I don't care how you go create that side hustle to create the life you want. Decide what it is, go educate yourself, and then just take massive freaking action, and it'll come together. My most successful warriors, my most successful coaching students aren't the smartest. They're not the ones that started with the most money. They're not the most, knowledgeable in the business. They're just the ones that take the most action. You know, they just go do it. Yeah, they're going to make some mistakes.
Absolutely.
But
can't
that's
be
part
avoided.
of that's part of the business. And
you can't ski without falling down. It doesn't work.
That's it. And you know, you're gonna. It's not a straight line. But if you clear on what you want and why you want it, if one approach doesn't work, you change your approach, keep your focus on the goal, and that's a recipe for success. You just keep focused on that goal and change your approach as needed. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think you said it really well.
So your biggest hurdles in business has been well, the one you mentioned was people, and I would have to say the same thing. Yeah, I'd have to say the same thing. And you know, I've interviewed hundreds of people. I know you have as well. And you know, and any tricks of the trade with that you want to bring up? Any thoughts on when do you use personality profiles, by the way?
Less.
Really? Oh, interesting.
A very smart person once told me, if your gut kind of tells you this is the wrong person.
Oh, it's the wrong person. Yeah.
It's probably the wrong person. You can try to play around with it, and I'll tell you where it gets to be really challenging. Mediocrity. You know, you want really great people, and somebody sometimes has that spark, and you feel like you can get it out of them, but at the end of the day, they're just not performing as well, and maybe it's them, or maybe it's you, or maybe it's a clique. You know, because some of them, I've seen them go onwards and really perform somewhere else.
Really?
But that's the hardest one. You know, if somebody's really terrible or they're dishonest, that's a no-brainer.
That's a no-brainer, right.
But sometimes when you think you can get a little bit more and you just don't know how to do it, and you still have to make that difficult decision and cut. And, you know, by and large, people fall on their feet. I think you can be fair with people. You can be honest with them.
Oh, yeah.
But you're not doing them any favors by
If they're in the wrong place, they're in the wrong place. They're not going to thrive.
They'll do better. You're not going to thrive.
No, right. But they'll do better in another place for themselves. So you don't have to feel bad about making that move.
That's right.
But, you know, I look for work ethic and passion, and the rest of the stuff is, you know, the training you can do yourself. But those are the two things I like the most.
Passion, loyalty.
Loyalty as well, right.
Because stuff does not always go as smoothly as you want it to be. And I think that's where I try to show loyalty to my colleagues, and
same. Yeah.
And I expect to have it back when times are tough, because
that's right.
Because I still haven't figured out how to avoid, you know, the tougher times.
You know, we're in it right now. I mean, you know, on some of my portfolio as well, and we're just going to deal with it. You know, you just deal with it. But yeah, no. But about your gut comment, you know, our brain. I talk about this in my boot camp because it's so important. Because you know, there's a lot of partnerships that come out of our business. You know, people get together. It's a team sport, so you're gonna have partnerships. I've got a book actually of list of questions you should ask before you get in a partnership. And if you're listening and you haven't seen that, go to rodslinks.com. RODSLINKS.com. That's my link tree, and there's a bunch of free books there. And one of them is a book of questions you should ask before you get in a partnership, because a partnership, like a marriage, is easy to get into and hard to get out of. And so you want to ask the hard questions up front. But I always say, as a caveat to that, you know, our brains are super powerful, and we can pick up on micro nuances subconsciously that we're not even consciously aware of. And a great book about this is Stephen Pressman's book called Blink, where an art expert can look at a painting and they know it's a fake, but they don't know why they know it's a fake. And same way with a person. So, you know, if your brain is picking up on something's off, trust it. I can tell you, every time I've ignored it, I've regretted it.
Absolutely.
Every time. So, you know, that's my 2 cents on that.
Absolutely. Also, when it comes to partnerships, because this is an industry with partnerships, right? You can't do it alone.
It's it.
This isn't an island.
Right.
I prefer to date before I get married.
Well, yes.
And even then, sometimes it doesn't work out.
Right. Yeah. And what he means by that is, you know, when you meet somebody, you're like at my boot camp. If you came to my boot camp, or if you're, even in my warrior coaching program, I tell people, don't decide you're going to do everything together moving forward. Decide to do one deal together and see how everybody works together. See how well you handle disputes or conflict if they come up. See what the work ethic is.
Yeah,
and then decide if you're going to go forward and do more deals together.
And talk about what's going to happen if you do need a divorce, because those documents
in advance. And that's what's on that list of questions. That's one of the topics for sure.
It's kind of like a prenup before a marriage, I guess, but it's unpleasant. But you have to talk about what happens if You have to leave the emotion out and talk about, what happens if somebody's not working out? What happens if we get in an argument? What happens, every eventuality you can think of. And those are important questions. And so, yeah. Well, listen, Jonah, this has been a blast. I really have enjoyed talking to you, and it's such a pleasure to meet you, and I really appreciate you coming down to chat with me. Rod, you have you do great work. I love, your podcast, super educational, always something to learn, always something new. And thank you so much for hosting me. It's been a pleasure.
Kind of you to say that. Thank you, brother. Thank you.